been involved in a lot of different things over the years, but the thread of financial engineering, financial architecture, money in markets is constant throughout the various activities I've been involved with. And so it's always been of interest to me. And like I said, it goes back to the early 80s when you had this incredible creative period on Wall Street, which was the result of the work done actually in the 1970s in America is when you had the start of listed option trading in Chicago based on the option volatility formula, which is a Nobel Prize-winning formula that describes how you can price an option and based on the volatility of that option. So it's a mathematical formula that says that if the market is bouncing up and down with a certain speed, then the price of this option is going to be X. If the market's bouncing up and down at a different speed, then the option is going to be worth Y. And this is the beginning, Jason, of the problem, really, because it was then that you saw bankers start to create products that were not based on stocks and bonds as we know them, as we understand them, but based on volatility, based on outlying events, based on things other than the company, let's say, it represents. Instead of buying IBM, for example, you're buying an option on IBM, and then you're buying an option on an option, and then an option on an option on an option. And this is what started 30 years accumulation in the system of what we now call derivatives, which are just, now there's over $500 trillion worth of these things in the system, even though the entire global GDP, the entire global output for the world is not even 1/10 that amount. So the total amount of these derivatives, of these financial products, is 10 times greater than the entire output of the world, and that means it's 40 times greater than the entire output of the United States. And this is the reason why every time Treasury Secretary Geithner throws another $1 trillion into what's called the financial crisis, why it doesn't seem to have any impact, because although he's throwing in $1 trillion and $2 trillion and $10 trillion and $12 trillion, which sounds like a lot of money, the problem is closer to $500 trillion. So he's just throwing, he's showing. I always say showing up to a gunfight carrying a knife. He's just, the scale of the problem is a lot bigger than any of the solutions right now. And this is why the crisis is not going away. In fact, the crisis is getting worse because Geithner is taking such small steps to fix the problem. He's actually just exacerbating the problem because the bankers are using the money that they're being given by the federal government to create more of these derivative products. And we saw that last week when the announcement was made at the G20 meeting that they're now going to beef up the operations over at the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. Now, what that means is that they're going to take hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of these derivative products, they're going to repackage them, and they're just going to dump them into the IMF. So they're not going to, in other words, instead of not trying to get rid of them, they're just trying to repackage them and sell them. Why? Because they take a fee every time they do that. So now we just put the problem into another vehicle, the IMF, and it gets bigger. And as has been talked about on your show and other shows over the past couple of years, this is leading inevitably to a situation where you have one centralized bank and one effectively a one world currency. And we have a world currency now. It's called a credit default swap, and this is the latest incarnation of all of the financial engineering that's been going on Wall Street for 30 years. It allows for banks to package and repackage and unpackage bundles of worthless paper with each other, and channel that paper back and forth outside of the view of regulators, outside of the view of the SEC, and to conduct the global financial business amongst themselves using this global financial global currency, the credit default swap, which basically amounts to a unit of financial fraud, is what this currency is collateralized by. It's a currency collateralized by fraud, and it's becoming the bigger and bigger business. It's not going away, the problem, and anyway, so that's kind of the current picture, current snapshot of what's going on.
So exactly, the IMF said that they were going to print billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, in this global quantitative easing. And what this really means with this global currency is going to be less transparency and more corruption for the guys at the top. Meanwhile, they point to like Bernie Madoff, who no doubt is a criminal, but he obviously had help in all over Wall Street, and they're not going after his cronies at all. And they're saying that when they go after Madoff himself, that they need a new global body to go after these guys. So, to me, this is all about globalism. When they say they're going to, have this global currency, and I explain that to people, they say, well, what does it look like? And I try to say to them, it doesn't look like anything yet. It's just them trading what really isn't there, because we have a fiat currency that they can literally, when you were on that television show, I think Alex may have played the clip while you were on, and you whipped out the toilet paper and you said, here's $1 trillion, here's $5 trillion. It really is worthless paper. We're the ones that are giving it value. And as they blow out the economy further, like you said, it's only going to get worse. Our currency is going to be devalued, I would say, probably over the next 2 or 3 years even further, correct? I mean, you don't think the dollar is going to recoup, do you?
No, the dollar is going to be replaced with a new currency that'll be part of this transformation. You mentioned a couple of things that are key. Mm-hmm. It does mean less transparency. And in a healthy economy, you want as much transparency as possible. But what we're talking about here is less transparency. The other thing we're talking about when people say, well, what's the big deal, global currency? I don't see any problem with that. The problem is twofold. Number one, it leads to less competition, because one of the dynamics that makes the global economy work is that countries and corporations and people are competing with each other, and it leads to a meritocracy, if you will, that there's a certain amount of business Darwinism where the strongest survive. But if you have one currency and the access to credit is determined not by competition but by cronyism and by favoritism, it destroys competition, and you end up with something like, the royal families in Europe of the Middle Ages, which is a lot of incest and a lot of insanity, because you're not weeding out the weak, you're breeding them, from a business sense. But the other thing to think about is, if in fact the credit is going to be awarded not based on merit but based on favoritism, really what we're talking about here are what I would call financial Jim Crow laws. If you remember the Jim Crow laws in America back before the Civil Rights era, you had the situation where the blacks in America had to use separate facilities. They had separate entrance to restaurants, separate entrance to restrooms. They had to sit in the back of the bus. Mm-hmm. Well, basically, we're in a period of financial Jim Crow laws, where if you're not down with the administration, if you're not kowtowing to the administration, you're going to pay a lot more for your interest. And because everyone effectively is in debt, everyone's in debt. So the only question is, how much do you pay on your interest? Mm-hmm. And if you're on the wrong side of these financial Jim Crow laws, you're going to be paying 15, 16, 17, 18% on your money. If it's a check cashing scheme in a city, you're paying 35% on your money, versus the people on the inside who are the masters, if you will, living in the big house. They're paying 1%, 0.5%. If you had a lot of money, you could you borrow it from Japan now. Japan, the cost of borrowing money in Japan is less than 1%. It's less than 0.5%. But if you're an American and you go buy a car, the cost or you're out there using a credit card, you're paying 16, 17%. So why is it that for some people are able to borrow money at 0.5%, and other people have to pay 16, 17%? The only reason is because of these what I call these financial Jim Crow laws. They're being discriminated against, and this is leading to incredible tension in society because people are realizing now that people don't want to be discriminated against. People don't want to be put in a ghetto, the debt ghetto, a virtual debt ghetto, paying usurious rates on their money, and having no way to escape the situation, having no way to escape their debt indebtedness, and this is leading